invitation to be here, and thank you all for attending. The question that you just asked me, is there any will to resist jihad in the United States today? Unfortunately, I hate to bring bad news, but there isn't. Most people have decided that this is a problem of the past. It no longer exists. Joe Biden, as a matter of fact, recently said that he wants to address not the problems of 2001, but the problems of 2021. And meanwhile, his Justice Department has said, without any evidence whatsoever, that white supremacists are the largest terror threat in the United States, not Islamic jihadis. Consequently, what Joe Biden clearly means is that he's going to be directing the counter-terror efforts of the US government against American citizens that he's calling white supremacists, not against Islamic jihadis. But the problem, of course, did not start with Joe Biden. The problem actually started not even on September 11th, 2001. In a very important way, the problem began on September 17th, 2001, a day which everyone has forgotten. But on September 17th, 2001, the president of the United States at that time, George W. Bush, went into a mosque in Washington, D.C., and he declared that Islam was a religion of peace. Standing behind him were Nihad Awad of the Council on American Islamic Relations, which has been found by the United States Justice Department to be the American arm of Hamas, which is a terrorist group in Gaza, and Abdurrahman al-Amoudi, who was the head of an organization called the American Muslim Council, which no longer exists, and al-Amoudi is in prison now for financing al-Qaeda. So in front of these two supporters of jihad, Bush declared this, that Islam is a religion of peace, and this has deformed the American response and the global response to the jihad terror threat ever since, because he made it difficult for the American government to assess the motivating ideology behind the attacks. And so Niraj was just speaking about having a fair debate and the necessity to speak honestly about the belief system that led to the situation that the world is in today regarding jihad terrorism everywhere. And yet the problem is that the American government worked assiduously to ensure that there would not be a fair debate, and there would not be any way to discuss these issues. You introduced me just a moment ago as having instructed the FBI, instructed military organizations in the United States about the nature of the jihad threat, and that is true. I did that. However, it must also be noted in the context of the discussion today that I did that in the face of pressure from people in the FBI, people in the CIA, and people in the military who thought that it was a terrible thing that Islam was being discussed in connection with terrorism, because they were committed to the idea that Islam is a religion of peace and had nothing to do with terrorism, and that the terrorists, despite their own words, were motivated by considerations completely apart from Islam and jihad. Now, this was fantasy and had no basis in reality, but nonetheless, it became the policy of the US government. And so in 2011, 10 years ago, I was dismissed from instructing the FBI and the military, and all materials containing any mention of Islam and jihad were removed from counterterrorism training by the Obama administration. And the Obama administration renamed the counterterror approach Countering Violent Extremism. Now, this is extremely insidious in ways that were not immediately apparent in 2011, but are now. Because what has happened in the interim is that extremism, this very vague word that can be used as a catch-all for pretty much anything, has been applied not to the jihad terrorists, but actually to me personally and to others who have spoken honestly about the motivating ideology of the terrorists. And so you have the United States government working with an organization here called the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has classified me and others who speak honestly about the jihad threat as extremists. So when the Obama administration and now the Biden administration says they're countering violent extremism, they mean me and others like me. And not, this is no joke and this is no exaggeration either, because the violent part remains absurd in the light of the fact that I have never advocated for or approved of any violence of any kind, and have always called for legal, lawful measures within the limits of the legal systems of the various nations to resist jihad violence. Nonetheless, the Global Internet Forum for Counterterrorism, which is an organization that is sponsored by Microsoft, YouTube, Twitter, and so on, the social media giants, has classified my organization, Jihad Watch, as violent extremist. Now, this has no basis in fact, no basis in reality, and I apologize for the reference, the personal references, but it's not just me they're going after, and ultimately this isn't personal. What there is a concerted effort on the part of the left internationally to destroy any resistance to jihad violence, to stigmatize, demonize, marginalize, and silence those who speak the way we are speaking today. And so the real problem is the left. If it weren't for the left, and this is why I commend you for having a seminar about jihad and communism, because if it weren't for the communists and the stooges and useful idiots of the communists like George W. Bush and others, if it weren't for them, then we could deal adequately with this threat. And we could take up the example of Japan that was so ably delineated earlier, that Japan has no problem unapologetically speaking out in defending its own culture, its own society, its own history, its own mores. If you tried to do that in the United States, and I would venture to suggest if you tried to do that in India as well, then you get called racist and bigoted and Islamophobic and all these words that are designed to make it so that people of goodwill will not listen to what you are saying, but will turn away and think this is some monster, this is some racist. We have to go elsewhere to find any workable solution to this problem. The victory of this perspective in the United States 20 years after 9/11 is near total. For example, the Virginia Department of Education recently released a video instructing teachers about how to teach about 9/11. And it said, what you have to do is avoid Islamophobia above all. You have to avoid talking about Muslims as if they had anything to do with this, because Muslims are being victimized in the United States by vigilantes who are blaming them for 9/11. Now, this is not true. This doesn't happen. There are hate crimes in the United States. The FBI keeps track of hate crimes, and there are some hate crimes against Muslims, but it's a very small number. Even one is not justified. I'm not saying that any of this should happen, but it's a very small number, much smaller than the number of attacks on Jews. But you hear nothing about anti-Semitism in the United States. You hear only about Islamophobia. This is because this is part of a larger campaign to deflect attention away from the jihad terrorists and to make people ashamed and think they can't talk about these issues because they will be called racist, they'll be called Islamophobic. And so recently, a video producer went to the University of Florida and showed them some of the video from the Virginia Department of Education and asked them, what do you think? How should we speak about 9/11? And they said, we should above all avoid blaming anyone and focus on the faults of America. This is in America. This is in the University of Florida. But pride in one's own nation has been stigmatized, and defending one's own nation has been stigmatized. And I would venture once again to say this is not just in America, this is happening. And this is because of the left. in its attempts to destroy the existing governments, to destroy the existing nation states, and pursue its goal of socialist internationalism. Now, many people ask me, but why would socialist communist internationalists want to ally with Islamic jihadis when the communist internationalists are libertines and the Islamic jihadis have a very strict morality, morality that's twisted in many ways, as we know, but nonetheless, it's a morality that conflicts with that of the left in many ways. And the answer is they both want to destroy the existing order. And on that basis, they are allies. They both want to bring down the societies that exist and establish an authoritarian superstate that transcends national boundaries. Now, what is Sharia? What is Islamic law? What is the caliphate? But an authoritarian superstate that transcends national boundaries. And so the left and Islam have a very deep ideological bond based on their shared desire to create, to destroy nation states as they exist today, and to create an internationalist authoritarian state that is fundamentally opposed to the freedoms that many of us take for granted around the world today. And so you look at their foremost enemies, and you have Narendra Modi in India. Why is he so hated? Because he speaks up for an identity for the nation, and he defends the nation in a way that is unacceptable to the internationalists. Donald Trump said, we're going to put America first, and every leader of every nation should put his nation first. And this is why he was very friendly with the Prime Minister of India. But Donald Trump had to be destroyed as a result, because putting America first is exactly what they don't want to do. They want to put all the nation states last and destroy them. Islam works wonderfully with that because it lends itself to authoritarianism. There has never been a free republic, never been a democracy in a majority Muslim country, with the partial exception of Turkey. And it's only a partial exception because secularism in Turkey never had any influence outside of Istanbul and Ankara, and was always imposed on the rest of the country by the force of the military. And so Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey, is wildly popular because he wants to destroy secularism, and he's working on bringing that about. And so the task before us is very great. We have to resist the Islamic Jihad, but above all, we have to destroy the left that is enabling the Islamic Jihad. And there is no easy answer to how we can do that, except to continue to support politicians who stand against the left and stand against its insidious and frankly evil agenda. And so this is a very tremendous problem, but the war is not over. And 20 years later, the situation is very great, but the fact that we're having this conference in itself is an indication that people are awakening to the magnitude and the nature of what we're facing and coming together. And this is what we need to do. Thank you very much.